impressed. I love it that you're coming out on the theme of democracy. That tells me a lot just right there. Glad you can do it. My name is Sherwood, Guernsey. And if you, I know that you're dressed in white. I actually started out this morning with also a white jacket, but I decided that you all might think I was a lawyer from Charleston, South Carolina. And that's not the case. I live in Williamstown. I used to be in the legislature, so you can call me a politician. I've stayed very active since then because I believe in our democracy. So we're going to have today a really amazing panel of folks with different perspectives. You will see that very soon. It all began when our wonderful director, Alan and Jessica, and I got together to figure out, well, we got these plays. We got Camelot, we got Eisenhower, we got NA, and there's an underlying theme here, how they're all related to democracy. And so it didn't take us very long to say, let's have a roundtable on democracy. That's the genesis of why we're all here. To bring special meaning out of these incredible plays. The only thing missing is the roundtable. But we got the panel, and that's what's most important. Now, I got to remind you, of course, always have to remind you to turn off your cell phones. Please do that. I know I often forget, so believe me. We've got a great panel. The moderator is going to be Ray LaRouge. I'm going to introduce him in just a second. But I wanted to say, how many people think our democracy is in danger? Just raise your hand. Quick, raise your hand. I just want to get a sense of the audience. Okay? I'm hopeful that they will address, and I'm sure they will, where we are on the trajectory of potentially losing this democracy. How we got there and whatever other questions Ray is going to raise. I urge you to pay close attention. These are very qualified people with different perspectives. So let's welcome the panel of the Roundtable on Democracy. Ray, come on out.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our discussion, a deeper look democracy roundtable here at the Barrington Stage Company. I'm Ray LaRouge, professor of political science at UMASS Amherst, and I'm very honored to moderate this discussion about the values, the tensions, and the questions at the heart of democracy, especially as explored through this season's powerful lineup of plays. We're here to think today, I want to remind you, beyond partisanship, to reflect on how we govern, why ideals matter, and what it means to hold power responsibly in a free society. So in the spirit of King Arthur, we have created our own roundtable here today, and the panel includes voices from the stage, from the State House, and from the newsroom. So let me just briefly introduce the panelists so you get a sense from where they might be coming from. So Alan Paul, of course, is the artistic director of Barrington Stage Company. So he directed this season's Camelot. His past BSC productions include A Tender Thing and Next to Normal, both which earned Berkshire Theatre Critics Awards. He made his debut with Cabaret, and which won 8 Berkshire Critics Awards, including Outstanding Director. So he also, before this, spent 15 seasons as the Associate Director, Artistic Director of Washington Shakespeare Theatre Company. Some of you may have been there. And he collaborates frequently with the National Symphony Orchestra, including directing John Williams' 90th birthday celebration. So welcome. Tricia Farley-Bouvier, she represents her hometown of Pittsfield in the I love this fact. She's a former teacher, being a teacher myself. She holds a degree in special and early childhood education. She chairs many important committees, particularly on IT and the internet in the House. She co-chairs the House Progressive Caucus, the Women's Caucus Task Force on Sexual Violence, and her priorities in the House are child welfare, education, small issues, transportation, and supporting victims of sexual violence, all grounded in a commitment to supporting Pittsfield. So thank you, Tricia, for being here. Senator Paul Moore was first elected to the Massachusetts House in 2010. He moved to the Senate in 2023. Growing up in a working class household, Senator Mark took advantage of opportunities offered to him by American society. He was a former Verizon splice technician and union leader, and then he proceeded to earn more degrees than I can ever imagine. Associate degree, bachelor's degree in finance, master's in labor relations, JD, PhD, Now he's getting, he told me just before backstage, he's getting his LLM. Oh, you completed already? Okay. So he, pretty impressive. So he co-chairs the Senate Arts and Cultural Development Committee, and he's champion labor rights, higher education, climate initiatives, rural broadband. Again, all these important issues. Let's welcome Senator Panelists. Finally, we're lucky to have Jim Brooke, a veteran foreign correspondent. He has been all over the world. He spent over 2 decades with the New York Times, serving as bureau chief in Tokyo, Brazil, West Africa, Canada, and Denver. After beginning as assistant to, some of you may remember, James Reston of the New York Times. Graduate of Yale in Latin American Studies, he's worked for Bloomberg News, Voice of America, and several other publications. He began his reporting career right here at the Berkshire Eagle. So let's welcome Jim. Today, we're brought on these unique experiences to explore the tensions of democratic life. But before I start, let me turn to each panelist and ask them for opening reflections on how they view democracy through their lens. Based on where you're situated, give us your understanding of democracy, and if you like, tell us where you think we are now and where we might be headed. So, why don't we start with you, Joe?
Okay. Thanks. I guess having worked around the world, and I said something to Senator Mark, which sounded probably a little snotty, that I'd been to Burkina Faso twice before I ever got to Boston. I can say that as a true Berkshirite. Around the world, they want what we have. And I've covered the protests against Pinochet in Chile, against Putin in Moscow, against Lukashenko in Belarus, and what we're now seeing playing out in Ukraine. There is a sizable part of the world that wants what we have, which is free press, multi-party democracies, open societies, freedom to travel, etc. I've seen it time again and again. You will see that reflected a little bit in the visa lines outside of American embassies and consulates around the world, which you do not see in front of the embassies of Belarus and Russia. I think we as Americans have been a little asleep at the wheel, taking for granted what we have and thinking that somehow through osmosis the upcoming generation knows what we know. I don't believe in telepathy. I believe in civic education. My youngest son is at Amherst, and I think they're doing a fine job there. Let's see how things go at the high school level. But I really think we have to focus on that. Basically teaching people the basics of our society, a very exciting 250-year-old experiment in democracy. I think in recent years, maybe we've obsessed a little bit too much on the negatives, and we should balance the ship and play up the positives. I just wanted to read a very quick thing that I found. First of all, we're in a period of deep polarization, but those of us with a little gray hair can remember when Nixon was painted with the swastika, when the Weathermen and the Black Panthers were shooting cops. We have been through terrible polarization. And I ran into this quote. In fact, one of the books I bought at Lang's bookstore was the Anarchist Cookbook, which basically told people how to make plastic explosives, this sort of thing. So, we've been there. This isn't the end of the world. I'm not minimizing our current situation. Here's an interesting essay. From a lawyer who was down in the basement of the Executive Office Building in Washington, and he wrote the 82nd Airborne, which are troops, was in the basement of the EOB. I went down to talk to some of the guys and walk among them. They were lying on the floor, leaning on their packs and their helmets and their cartridge belts, rifles cocked, and you're thinking, this can't be the United States of America. This is not the greatest free democracy in the world. This is a nation at war with itself. This was written by Charles Colson in May 1970. So we have been through tough times, and the next year we had the largest mass arrests in the modern history of our country. 12,000 protesters arrested. So you know, the Republic will survive, probably thanks to folks like are you there, out there. But let's try to keep a bit of a balance that this is not the end of the world. Anyway, I'll pass on.
Thanks.
I don't know how to follow that. I'll just give you a little context. I spent 15 years at one of the leading theaters in Washington. So everything we did, while nonpartisan, was political because it was there. I did a first production of Camelot in 2018 there because I felt the times called for King Arthur as they do now. And in 2018, when we opened the show, I'll never forget it. We had these big dinners before the show, 300 people in the basement of the theater. And at the opening night was, of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a big stalwart of the theater community, Justice Breyer, and then Ben Carson came, because he was in the administration then, and Rudy Giuliani. And I thought, and I had to address this crowd, and I thought, how do I do that? And I thought, well, you just present the show. And I think, you know, King Arthur stands for what we all need, which is the end of the first act of the show. He says, violence is not strength, and compassion is not weakness. And I just felt that 2025 called for Arthur. So I will leave more political musings to these two, but just to say that's my context for being here.
Thank you so much, and it's pretty amazing to share a stage with these very learned gentlemen. And what you've done this season by bringing together these powerful plays like into a theme is just extremely well done, and I congratulate you on the stage. It gives us an opportunity to have these kinds of discussions and get into these deeper thoughts and wonder. So when it comes to democracy in 2025, what I'm hearing is people saying, well, listen, he won. He even won the popular vote this time, and so that's what democracy is. And my thought is, well, no. Democracy is more than that. To have a healthy democracy, yes, you have to have free and fair elections, so let's just leave that thought to the side for a minute. But you need to have all your institutions working freely and fairly, including your judiciary, including having due process, including having a free and fair press. And all of those things are endangered right now. And so, people can say in, other countries there are elections and the popular vote. Well, Putin wins the popular vote, right? And so, but that's not a democracy. So democracy is much, much more than fair elections. And I think it is our job to keep fighting for those things, keep challenging, what is not democratic in this country, what is really threatening us. And I agree with Jim when he said this is not the end of the world. And I do believe we will have a post-Trump era. And it's up to all of us as to what that will look like. And yeah, 12,000 arrests for protesters, bring it on, bring it on.
Well, thank you, Jessica and Maura and Alan and Sherwood for hosting us and bearing the stage. This is really wonderful and great to be here with Ray and my fellow panelists. And if we think about democracy, there's 200 people here on a Sunday morning in Pittsfield, so thank all of you as well for being engaged. When we question whether democracy will survive and whether democracy will thrive, it really depends on what all of us in the community do, what all of us, how seriously we take our responsibility, which of course is not limited to just voting. It's limited to participating and being involved and making your opinions heard and then gathering to either learn or to educate or to be involved in a protest. And so for me to be here today, I think is really wonderful because generally when I do an office hours or I'm at an event, there's a very specific thing we're being questioned about and a very specific outcome that people are looking for. And it's nice to have this chance to get like a little more philosophical. And I will say, as we enter the 250th year of the United States of America, from the beginning, democracy is a participatory sport. Like, the reason I started to like politics and get involved in campaigns was when Dukakis was the governor and he ran for president. I was a little kid and he marched in the parade. I got really excited and I watched and he lost and I couldn't believe it. And I also like the Red Sox a lot. Oh, wait, can I say that here? Yeah. But no matter how hard, like, I cheer for the Red Sox or the Celtics or whoever it is, like, I can't make a difference in the outcome. But in democracy, in electoral politics, every one of us can actually be part of the team. And so I've always thought that was really important. And if you go back to right after the Constitutional Convention in 1787, they asked Ben Franklin, Dr. Franklin, what kind of government did we come up with? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. And you know what that means is, how engaged are we going to be? How much do we care that we stay a democracy? And how much do we want to participate and keep it that way? Because in some ways, like Tricia said, democracy is actually thriving because there was really high turnout last time. Just in my election, we'll use as an example, compared to 2022, last year I got 14,000 more votes than I did the year before, but the percent of the vote I got actually went down 4%. So that means democracy is thriving, but maybe different people that we don't necessarily all agree with are also participating, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a matter of how do we keep in touch with the fact that no matter how we feel policy-wise, that we care about the Constitution, we care about the rule of law, we care that due process extends to everybody, we care that everybody has the right to participate in the democracy, and how do we find the places to collaborate as opposed to what I am seeing right now, which is my way or no way, and that is not healthy for democracy.
Thank you, Dennis, for some of those opening remarks. There's a lot for us to chew on here. I'm going to give a few targeted questions here to each person based on their background. Let me start with you, Alan. So each play has kind of a different leadership model. You have Arthur's idealism, right? Eisenhower's, I would call it restraint. And then you have this dynamic between Pelosi and AOC and NA. What do you think theater uniquely offers in terms of portraying these different modes of power? And were you thinking about, how are you curating this, if you have any broader comments about that?
Well, first of all, I just want to say this very impressive, august group of panelists was backstage moments ago trying to take pictures with swords and shields. And I said they could come on stage with them. And I said, no, this is a serious panel. But that maybe will tell you the truth. You know, you put a season together and you have no rhyme or reason, and then things, you know, have a purpose. And of course it began because I felt, well, I planned Camelot a year ago and I wasn't sure if it would be celebratory or if we would need the wisdom of King Arthur, but I figured either way the audience would enjoy it. And then I was on the street in New York, and a board member had seen this play NA, which is, you know, Nancy Pelosi and AOC, and it follows from just before her election, after the primary, through January 6th, the relationship of those two women. And who in the audience got to see that? Oh, good, a lot of people. I picked it before the election, and just because I was fascinated by these two women. And then, of course, after the election, Nancy published a book. AOC and Bernie went barnstorming across the country, hundreds of thousands of people. And the idea of generational politics became even more interesting to me after the election. And I was fascinated by those two perspectives. And I think when you say what is interesting, of course, the politics and their style of leadership are so different. But that play began to get under the skin of the two women and their personal experience. And I thought that was fascinating because in the play, although their approach is quite different, they have much in common and much to learn from each other. And of course, I think it's expected in the play that AOC would learn something from Pelosi, but in the play, Pelosi learns quite a bit from AOC about the next generation and what they want and how to govern. And then I picked a play called Eisenhower. Who here saw that? Oh, good, good. It's a one-man show starring John Rubinstein, who was Pippin in the original Pippin. And I had heard about this one-man show. It played briefly off Broadway in New York, and then at another theater in Washington. And I got a video of it, and I found it so striking. I knew a lot about Eisenhower's policy and certain things relating to World War II and the presidency, but not a lot about the person. And I think what's so interesting is to see the man behind what you know. And the premise of the play, for those of you that didn't see it, is a ranking of presidents comes out, and he's like number 18. I guess the play was written in the context is the 60s. And then, of course, when they took a poll 3 years ago, it's like number 6. And his accomplishments were in perspective. So, I didn't know when I was programming the season after the election if I should do any of these plays, because I thought, do we really want to see all this political stuff? Are we just going to be exhausted by it? Do I want to run a theater that takes the risk of running into the fray and having to comment on this, or getting hate mail, or getting this or that? And, no hate mail so far. We've got a week left.
Still time.
They'll write it about other things. But what I doubled down on, and I'm so glad that I think you all feel the same way, is these 3 plays. We have needed a port in a storm to talk about these things and to do a status check or a gut check of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And I think, while I believe the theater is a nonpartisan place, I also believe the theater should really take an active role in delving into the big issues of our time, starting a conversation. And so I'm so happy that beyond the entertainment value of these 3 pieces, they've given us a lot to talk about, and I'm excited for more of that in the future.
Well, Alan, Barrington Stage tradition and reputation is that Barrington Stage is unafraid. And so I'm really glad with you here that you're carrying on that tradition. So thank you from the hometown girl. Thank you very much. I would like to talk about the generational tension. We experience that all the time in the State House. And some of the generational tension is actual age difference. And some of it is like how many years experience that you're in the building. That's the term we use, in the building. And I'm going back to something Guinevere said. They were talking about does might make right, and use might to make right, and she said, well, does right mean you win? Right? And that is something that we are really challenged with as progressives in government, is just because you're right doesn't mean you're going to win. Because we have to, I've had to keep learning this lesson over and over again. Not everybody thinks the way that I think. And you need to count the votes, which is something Nancy Pelosi was really good at, and building coalition. And it is really hard work to be able to do that. And just because you think you have the best idea, or the thing that makes the most sense, or the thing that everybody's talking about right now, has almost nothing to do with whether you're going to get a piece of legislation passed. I'll give you an example. There's a few years ago, after almost 10 years, we passed the driver's license bill here, and that took a coalition of a lot of unlikely partners. So, for example, law enforcement. Like, we really needed law enforcement on our side on that one. We needed insurance companies on our side. Now, those aren't considered usual partners on something like that, right? But that's the kind of coalition, really hard work of, hundreds of individual conversations to be able to pass a bill like that just made so much sense. Like, why wouldn't you just do it in 5 minutes, right? But people have a lot of different opinions about it, and some of them deeply based in emotion, because some bad things had happened, and it was blamed on the immigrant, right? And if your son is killed in a hit-and-run accident and it was an immigrant who was undocumented driving without a license, then of course the problem was the immigrant. It takes a lot of work to do this, and so I go back to two things. One, right doesn't mean you win, and two, doing the practical work of counting those votes and building those coalitions is how we really form the base of the democracy.
Thanks. Actually, thanks very much for that. I was going to go in that direction myself. I want to hear more from Paul, because as you're suggesting, Tricia, you work in a slow, messy institution that is grounded in ideals. Let's face it. I mean, the oldest constitution, living constitution in America is the Massachusetts Constitution. Paul, would you tell us more about these challenges?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's also generational, but in a different way. Because talking about Eisenhower, and he had a relatively low ranking at the end of his presidency, because I think his vision, or at least what he was trying to accomplish, was something that was going to be a 10 to 20 to 30-year plan. And so now, as people look back, it's like, oh wow, we did a great job with the Cold War and defending freedom in Europe, and we did a great job with the interstate highway system that, that was unthinkable at the time. These are long-term projects, and when you exist in a world where your contract is renewed every 2 years or every 4 years, it's really hard to have a vision that in 20 years this is going to work. Trust me, in 20 years from now you're going to be really happy, but keep voting for me. It lends itself to often, I think, short-sightedness. And then when you throw in the structure, so when the Massachusetts Constitution was established in 1780, it was forward-thinking, it was groundbreaking, it was totally different than the national system under the Articles of Confederation, and eventually becomes the model for government that the US Constitution takes and has existed for nearly 240 years. And when I say it's groundbreaking, it's like you're going from a system under Britain where there's a parliament and a king and they're expected to do certain things, and at that moment in time, George III got a little out of whack. There was no one to check and balance him. The parliament was just falling over themselves to make sure they were ratifying everything he wanted to do and giving him as much authority as possible, as they thought that was good for their political careers. And you go into the Articles of Confederation where each state has one vote and the states are essentially sovereign. And then you move into this federation that we've had. And when you think about all of these levels of government, that by dividing amongst 3 branches of government, which was unprecedented at the time, and multiple layers, city and town, state level, federal, and then now an international community as well, the fact that we get anything done is a miracle. I'm being 100% serious. And at the same time, look at what's happening right now in our country, where one person apparently seems to think they don't need to follow those checks and balances. And you mentioned Putin. Putin has a democracy. There's levels of government in North Korea as well. There's a legislature. Guess what? They always vote 100% of the time with the dear leader. So the point is, the system is intentionally set up to not let any one person, any one state, any one party, any one group take complete control over the country. And a frustrating side effect of that is we move at a very slow pace. I like to say when people write to me, the Constitution was set up in 1780 and we move at a 1780 pace, which gets very frustrating in 2025. But when I look at the moment we're in right now, I think to myself, we're making the law. We're not cooking pancakes here. And so these things that we do have serious impact sometimes on people's lives. And so while frustrating, I'm often very glad that we have the system we do as slow as it moves. And I hope we're all going to try to fight to preserve that, because in a world where might isn't always right and right doesn't always have the might, there are people that love what they're seeing. That, yeah, I like that he talks no nonsense and he's getting things done. You know, that's a thing. And so we have to accept that. I prefer it to go a little slower and more deliberative if we want the system that we've come accustomed to continue. Because when someone can just do whatever they want, I don't think the results end up that great.
Yes. It sounds like we all need to do some more educating about these processes, because a lot of people expect change right away. Let me turn to you, Jim. So you've reported from countries where democracy is new, maybe fragile, maybe non-existent or disappearing. What parallels did you see in Camelot or even Eisenhower that echo some real democratic struggles that you observed?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that stuck with me from Camelot is the integrity of President Eisenhower. And I think that shines through crystal clear, and we can obviously contrast that with the present moment. And Camelot just had those wonderful lines you just recited, and full of truisms. And we know that it was seen as a bit of a model of the 3 years of the Kennedy presidency. You know, I think the current president really does not like soft power. He dismantled AID and Radio Free Europe, Voice of America. We have a lot of soft power through our movies, through the internet, and we are very much admired for our open, tolerant, multiracial society, which others can only aspire to. So even though some of these government mechanisms have been dismantled, and by the way, I'll just say something, Radio Free Europe, I speak and read Russian. Radio Free Europe, Radio Svoboda, was really one of the top 5 independent intelligence sources of information on the Russian-speaking world, and that is a huge loss. And you've seen the Europeans are so shocked that some of the countries like Poland, and I think maybe Norway, are actually contributing to the Radio Free Europe budget to keep it alive. So that is a big loss, and we were commenting about, maybe Tricia, you said this, but strength is not, what was that phrase?
Because you're right doesn't mean you're gonna win.
Yeah, right. Well, no, but the strength is not always power, and we have a lot of military strength. I just read that Russia's about to scrap metal its only Air Force aircraft carrier. We have 11 aircraft carriers, but we have our weaknesses, and military might should not be equalized with success on many fronts. I think what we're seeing in Ukraine is that the Russian army has done very poorly, pathetically. And here's a date to watch. Probably around January will be, Moscow will have been fighting the Ukrainians the same amount of time they fought the Nazis in World War II, and they've achieved very little, frankly. They've killed a lot of people, a lot of their own people. And that is an example of a country that has no democracy. I remember I was living in Moscow. I like to be provocative sometimes, and the Russians are very quick to jump on the bait. I said, well, when will Russia have the political maturity of Brazil, a country that lived for 10 years, and elect their own mayors, and elect their own state governors? And that, of course, was highly offensive to the Russians, who like to blather on about Dostoevsky and their soul. I think we have to appreciate, and Brazil is having problems right now, but it is an open society. When I lived in Russia, it was a much more open society. These places can open and close, and that's why we all have to be vigilant about our freedoms. I've seen someplace like Russia, which was quite open in the time I was there, and now is basically sort of Slavic North Korea. Yeah. Thanks,
Jim. Let me turn back to Alan and getting back to Camelot. So, you've made some decisions about paring back some things and adding here, you contrasting human ideals with human flaws. What do you want, in thinking about the musical, what did you want audiences to grapple with as they watched Arthur's rise and fall?
Well, I mean, I made a couple decisions about the ideas in it and then about the way we staged it. The scene that Tricia was referring to there, Arthur has been king for 5 years, and he calls England a jungle that he can't control. And he and her together get the idea of a round table. They just sort of stumble upon it. And normally they're in a grand throne room talking very formally about it. And I thought, put him in a bathtub, you know? Why not? He's in the bath. They're just thinking. And I might have stolen it from the movie with Vanessa Redgrave or something. And the cast made fun of me and called it the bathtub scene, the famous bathtub scene from Camelot. But and normally in the original version of the play, Arthur gets the idea for the round table, and Guinevere's knitting in the script and just says, oh yes, that's lovely. And so I went to the Lerner-in-Lowe estate and said, I'm going to do the show, but I can't do the scene that way. She's got to be a part of it too, because they're a partnership. And I thought of partnerships that we know, Bill and Hillary Clinton, and how she would have been a part of it. So that was important to me, and it's why she's especially peeved when Lancelot comes in and says, what would you know about chivalry or anything, and she's made up the whole system. And I wanted to follow the journey of Mordred. Mordred is normally his bastard son. He comes back in the second act, and it's normally just this unthreatening twit. And yet Arthur set up a society of law and order and justice, and Mordred is drumming up emotion, hatred amongst the other knights, pitting them against each other, awakening in them violence. And I thought, what if he was a credible threat to Arthur's point of view, and Arthur just can't see it because it's his long-lost son, and he's got a blind spot for him. And I thought the second half of the show could be political. It could have weight if you have the juxtaposition of these two ideas, because at the end of the show, Arthur really firmly believes that the round table in his way of life is dead forever. And then, of course, the little boy comes on at the end, and we put him in modern clothes to signify that the idea will live on forever. But I was able to do an edit of the script that really brought out those themes and cut a lot of trimmed the fat of it. And I think because I spent so long at a Shakespeare theater, I'm interested in Shakespearean characters, and I think Shakespeare was interested in how people got to be the way they got. And you meet Arthur, and he's a vapid boy yelling at Merlin, saying, "I am the king, turn me into a hawk." And then he's a young king that doesn't know what to do. And then he joins with the knights and is a warrior king. And then he's a thinking king, and then, of course, Lancelot and Guinevere have an affair, and he has to grapple with whether he's a king or a man, and then his whole kingdom is threatened. And I found it significant that in the opening, the final scene of the musical, he says, barbarism is the natural state of man. And Ken Clark, who does it, I have been screaming that because I want him to go all the way to the edge so that this young idealistic guy thinks that barbarism is the only way. And then at the very last moment, he's turned because he thinks his story will live on. And so I just wanted to bring all of that out of the piece in the hopes that in this old-fashioned musical that we might feel a sense of humanity in the leader, and then eventually a sense of hope at the end of the play that this idea that we all cling to of thoughtful, ascendant leadership, where might does equal right, could live on. And I think the greatest moment is Arthur's going to go into battle and probably die, and he sends the boy out, and he ends the show saying, "Run, boy, run!" And I think that's all of us.
Thank you for that.
It's pretty amazing. I'm not gonna lie, there were tears in my eyes in that last scene. So, and is that what kids are wearing these days? I'm just asking.
A doublet is very fashionable. Generational.
Okay. So would like to jump off on one of the words you used, Ellen, and that is twit. So speaking of twits, what Morad was able to do was to use sort of that inner barbarism that you talked about to divide people. And I think that is, you know, besides, I mean, we have the big things like the judiciary, due process, journalism, and you know, those are in crisis right now. But below that is the ability of the current administration to divide us. And for each of us to go back to our own, you know, whether it's our heritage or our own experience in life, and that feels threatened, and so then we have to be against the person next to us. And I think that is their most effective tool, is to divide us. And our most effective tool, our most powerful tool, is to stay in community and to do it with great joy, right? When we can do that, and theater, of course, is a way that we can do it. And so each time we're feeling kind of down about this and frustrated, and have a little rest every once in a while, but then come into community, and when we do it with great joy, it has even more power.
Does anyone want to pick up on the theme that Ellen also raised, in addition to what Tricia was talking about, the tension between your personal lives and your public duties? I mean, you don't have to expose anything here, but I mean, obviously, it's, you know, one of the things that as young people, they know being in office is hard, and it requires a lot of sacrifices. But we need good leaders in office, but there are tensions. You have to make these decisions.
I think there's a bad and a good, and so I'm going to say the bad first and just get it out of the way. When you get into a role like this takes over your life. I'm sorry, I'm going to say this. Every one of us in the Berkshire delegation has been divorced. It is not a joke. It is, my life was taken over by this, which I think speaks to both why I ran and also the impact it has on trying to maintain a regular life. Like, I ran because I believed in something. I believed in trying to make a change, and I was 30 years old when I ran. So I really thought, you know, I would get in there and everything would change, and guess what? That's not how it works. And you stay committed to it because you believe in what you're doing, and you believe in the people you serve, and you believe in the region you represent. And then this goes to the good part. So the good part is, if you look at why I would say 90% of our colleagues run, it's because they care, because they think they can make a difference, because they think they can do the job well, because they're willing to put themselves out there and take all the headaches and take all the risks, but hopefully come up with a better product. And I think that extends up to the presidency for the most part, because when I look at why most people that have run for president and become president have run, I think it was because even if I disagreed with their philosophy, they thought they could do a better job, or they had something that people weren't seeing that maybe they could shed light on. And then the contrast with the person who is the president right now, I don't think he ran because he thought democracy was great and he could make it better. I think he ran because he was used to just doing things his way in his family business that he inherited, and that, well, maybe, at best, maybe he thought if things were just simplified, I could make things better in the country. But I don't think that's actually what it is. I think he ran because it was something to boost his own ego, to show how popular he was, to revive his ratings in the show he was doing on TV at the time. And then you fast forward to this second term. Imagine how much trouble you have to be in, that the only way you get out of it is by becoming the president. I don't think that's why we want people to run for president, because it's going to get them out of trouble. And I believe he's an outlier, but if the style persists, then there's going to be more people that are going to want to emulate that. You know, like I liked Dukakis, I liked Kennedy, I liked FDR, and there's people out there right now that are watching, little kids, teenagers, even people in their 20s, that are thinking, yeah, I like his style.
And if I could add about the whole tension between personal life and you know, legislative life, political life, I think that really comes through with really what was the essence of the downfall of Camelot, and that was a personal relationship. And you know, this guy comes in, this bro comes on the scene, right? And he's as pure as could be, right? I mean, okay, you picked a guy with an amazing voice, I'm not gonna lie, Alan, it got to me. But he was so pure, and he was so great, and his ego was the size of, you know, way bigger than the Roundtable is his ego, right? But, you know, he couldn't keep it in his pants, right? We're going back to the word barbarism, right? Like the base human, you know, I don't even want to call it needs because it wasn't that big of a need. It was just a choice that they made, and it was a, you know, a personal failing that could take down, you know, an entire community. And then Morad was able to come and take advantage of that and sow all this division. And so, why do I say all that? I really wanted to say bro, by the way, while I was up here, but more than that, to say that when you have the responsibility of being, you know, an elected person, a public figure, you must have a higher personal standard for yourself. You must. And that, having a higher personal standard doesn't mean being flawless. We are all imperfect, and imperfect is okay. But when you do something that you are making a choice that is going to hurt other people, that is really, really difficult to take. It's just really difficult to take, and especially when you tout yourself to be this pure person, you know, and all that. And I think we see that, and you know, I have a problem with it.
There's a quote I have yet to use in the story. Putin was at a meeting with investors, and he joked, "Only cowards pay their debts." It's like, whoa, you want someone to invest in your country, and that's your founding principle. But I think that may apply a little bit to the man who's leading our own country, who's been through several bankruptcies. So that's just my stray thought.
Only suckers get captured, right? Is what he said about John McCain. Right?
So we're talking about generational communication and blood. And you know, as a teacher, this concerns me. I get a classroom of idealistic students, and they are developing a vision of what the world should look like, and then things happen, and they observe and they read the newspaper. So what does it take to hold on to this vision without slipping into cynicism? What does it take, you know, the last scene with Arthur, what do we tell our youth? I mean, does Arthur have anything for us to think about in transmitting, holding on to this vision even in the face of calamity? Anybody?
So Arthur was young, right, when he became king, right, and his vision was extremely valuable. And I'm going to argue the different side of the argument I made earlier today, and that is the voice, the vote, the position of a 30-year-old, a 25-year-old is no less valuable than that of a 60-year-old, 65-year-old, 70-year-old, 78-year-old, right? Like, each one of those votes and voices matter, and we who are older, at our peril, dismiss the voice of the young, right? I think New York City recent primary is a really good example of that. I'm not deeply into New York City politics. There might be people here who know much more about it, but it was a younger vote. It was a clear rejection of the establishment, and the candidate who won was able to tap into the communication preferred by young people and do it incredibly effectively. And getting the message across that actually mattered to the people of New York, the voters of New York, when they said, listen, we're gonna make your life more affordable. Now that's actually not an ideal, right? Like a lofty ideal to make your life more affordable, but that is the thing that the voters at the time were thinking of. So I think it's really important that we continue to listen to all voices, and all voices include, and maybe especially include, the young and the ideal.
You know, just to add to that, I think one of the most fascinating parts of the play NA was you have AOC and Pelosi, and AOC comes in with more idealistic things, and Pelosi's grilling her and saying, what's my favorite number? And she says, 218. Anything less than that I don't like. And it's so pragmatic. And in the course of their relationship, there's a pivotal scene at the end of the play where they've had a fight, and she's trying to convince AOC to be the next whip, because she's convinced that she cares so much about democracy that if she's in a position where she has to count the vote, that she will then, you know, change her perspective on you know, how to get to that 218. And I thought that was, if that did indeed happen, I don't know, but quite an interesting tactic to bring AOC, you know, into leadership. And I thought just that what you said made me remember that detail.
And then what Paul said earlier about that, you know, this Constitution was written in 1780, and often we work at the pace of 1780, and but you know, the rest of the world isn't working at this pace, right? The rest of the world, with the ever-growing use of technology, the use of data is a four-letter word. Just want to say that. It's extremely dangerous what's happening with our data. And if we cannot respond to some things as fast as what's happening with technology, again, we are at our peril. And I think that something that everyone can understand is the pace of AI and what's happening with AI. And we're just keep patted on the head, you know, from the tech bros. Oh, I got to say bro twice. That say, legislators, you don't understand. You don't understand. You know, don't regulate us. You don't understand it well enough to regulate us. But if we don't have the development and the investment in AI based in our values, then we're going to be in trouble.
Thanks. We have time for a little bit more. I have a question about storytelling, be it journalism, theater, or in politics. Is it essential to sustaining democracy, or does it obscure what's really going on? I mean, you know, the current president tells a story, there's a narrative. What's the importance of storytelling in our civic life, in our democracy?
The journal.
You know what? I think the president is a great storyteller. I remember I was in Kyiv having coffee with a friend from the LA Times, and I said, you know, this is probably between the first Trump mandate, and I said, you know, Trump is probably the most charismatic politician on the stage today. And she just looked at me like, I don't get it. But unfortunately, half the country does get it, and they love his stories, which don't seem to have much basis in fact. I've organized a media literacy event in October, and basically teaching young people and older people how to evaluate stories and how to evaluate the news, and don't just swallow everything you hear. And I go back to what I said at the outset about the value of schools and civic education. Schools essentially are a 7-8 hour sacred window of no screens, okay? increasingly, I think PHS has been restricting and banning in Lenox, where I live. And I know it's part of the county, northern part of the county. So that's where you can get stories into people. They can hear a different, more slower narrative that will tell them about our country. And another point I'd like to make is listening. I'm of the generation where reporters are supposed to listen first before they blah, 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 get on the stage in front of a live mic. I remember I was covering the Jean Ramsey killing in Boulder, Colorado. I was the Denver bureau chief. And Larry King's fixer calls me up and says, could you come on the air on Sunday? And so I bounced up New York. And New York said, absolutely not. New York Times reporters do not go on TV and do not show their opinions because they can't hide them. That was then, that was probably 1995 or sometime. Too many reporters are blah, 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 and not listening to what other people have to say. And that's, I don't learn anything by opening my mouth. Hopefully you are. But I just, I know what I have in my head. But if I listen to people, I open myself up to different perspectives. I think it's really important.
Well, I always say the first job of a legislator is to listen. That's like my go-to. And I will say that storytelling is one of the most important things you as a citizen can do with your legislator. When we hear from people in all different kinds of ways. The least effective, by the way, is a petition. Sorry, but for any of those who carry around petitions, but the second least effective way is a canned email. But if you send an email that tells your story and that why this impacts you, that does make a difference. That moves the needle. And if you had already built a relationship with your state rep, I always say that you should know your state rep and your state rep should know you. We don't represent that many number of people, by the way, that can happen. Then I'm like, oh, I know Sarah. Sarah thinks this. I trust Sarah's opinion, and so, that moves me, right? And so storytelling is incredibly important in the most important role of a democracy, and that is the citizen.
Yeah, and as a legislator, it's also important that we listen. We should listen more than we speak, but at the same time that we take the time to educate, because we do things that we have access to information and resources that the average person either doesn't have access to or doesn't have the time to access, and so it's our responsibility. You hire us as like your CEO and you're the board of directors. It's our responsibility to report back to you and let you know. And when we're explaining things, if we use a bunch of technobabble or lawyer jargon, then we're going to lose the idea. You have to storytell because you have to be able to explain it in a way that people understand. So like even coming out of like the electrical world, if I say, well, a volt is force and amperes are current, you'd be like, okay, what the hell does that mean? But if I say, volts are like your car goes 70 down the highway or it goes 60 down the highway, and current is like you have 3 lanes as opposed to 1. Now you kind of, does that make sense? Okay, so like you gotta personalize it, you gotta make it to something that people can relate to no matter what you're talking. And then, I know we're not supposed to turn this into an anti-Trump thing, but like, you would think the essence of storytelling would be that they're based on reality. And so true. It becomes much harder to debate somebody when they won't admit that they're lying, when they just say, no, that's not true. Like people ask, Canada's not gonna pay for the tariffs. Oh yeah, they do. Like how do you, so storytelling is supposed to mean relatable truth, not, I'm just making this up.
What I would just say to tie it all, that could be a Greek tragedy when we look back on it. And I just want to say, it occurs to me that we're talking about democracy. The Greeks really invented a version of democracy, that women were not a part of, but democracy of some kind. And halfway. But they also invented theater, and we're talking about storytelling, and I just think, we've had like 12,000 people in the last 3 weeks see Camelot, another week to go. And from time immemorial, people have gathered in a theater to watch something that is totally artificial. You know, you'd never see the stage and really think it's real life. It's storytelling. And yet there's a human need we have to see a version of our lives reflected back at us to understand our lives. And you'd think in 3,000 years we'd get better at understanding it. And yet you're all still here at the theater because we constantly have that need to grapple with trauma, fear, hope, resilience, all the big things in life. And even though everyone says theater's dying and all that stuff, I mean, we come together and we experience it communally in a room, and we do it every night. And I think it's so important and it's so necessary, and I'm so encouraged that all of you come to this particular theater and that we all do this together.
I think Alan said it so well. I had some comments, but I think he closed this session wonderfully. So I want to thank our panelists once again for this great discussion. Thank you for spending an hour with us and taking this deeper look. And enjoy the rest of your day at the Barrington stage. Thank you, everyone.